since the pandemic, the GPU, discrete GPU market has been like wild. When I rebuilt my PC with the 5600X processor, I wanted to upgrade my GPU. What would have been perfect, because being mostly a console gamer, would have been like a 3060 Ti at 550, which even was at that price was wild. But of course, they were sold out of graphic card everywhere, and the price just went up. It's sad though, because the drop in GPU market, which before the idea was that like you didn't change your processor that often, but every couple of years you would spend between 250 and 350 Canadian, and then get a new graphic card, and you would be okay for a while. That's what I did for Fallout 4 when it got released. But there's still hope. Intel just released the B580, the Battlemage version of the Arc, and the Canadian price is 350. So we need to test that card for sure. I did ask Intel if I could borrow one, and they accepted. It's the same disclaimer as normally. I asked to get the card for 2 weeks, and by the time you see that video, I will already have brought back the card to them. I'm not compensated for the review. I decided to test the card against my 3070. And I had a friend that had bought for like a small media center Arc 310, the first generation. It's only a 4 gig card, but I wanted to do a review of it, and I never found the time for it. So I think it's going to be interesting to just test the card at the same time. Now, of course, it's not going to be the same performance level. Also, it was interesting because I was supposed to test it with AM5. I have a 7800 X3D processor, but the motherboard died again. I received a dead on arrival on a replacement. But it's perfect because I'm going to use my AM4, the 5600X processor with 32 gig of RAM, which seems a realistic take on to install a $350 graphic card. So let's do it.
So let's talk about the spec first. You have 20 Xe core. You have like 20 ray tracing unit, 12 gig of VRAM, a 192 bits for the memory interface, and 456 gig for the memory bandwidth. For the peak top, it's 233, which is interesting because the NPU in my laptop is 45, so it should perform really better. And the TBP is 190 watt. It's only used one 8X pin connector, so it's nice to have like a thin card that doesn't take too much power. And of course, you have support with codec like AV1 and HEVC. You have 3 DisplayPort 2.1 and 1 HDMI 2.1. The Intel limited edition card really look good, and the build quality seems great. Here we have a layered view of the card, how it's built up. Of course, that would be interesting to open it, but because I'm gonna return it and it doesn't belong to me and I'm kind of clumsy, I'm not sure it would be a good idea anyways. So if you want to see a teardown, I'm sure Game & Nexus already did one. Now, all the marketing from Intel is aimed at 1440p, which they say they call the fastest growing resolution. All those slides that you're seeing are from the deck from directly from Intel. I have 2 ultra wide monitors, so I decided to test it in 3440 by 1440p, which is a little higher resolution than where the marketing is aiming. So that's going to push a little the performance. At least it's going to push a little the card more closer to its limit. Of course, I could have test 4K, but it's not a 4K. They don't aim for 4K with this card anyways. That doesn't mean on light title that 4K wouldn't be possible though. No, in other marketing they talk about how this card can beat the 4060. It's going to be interesting. 1, I don't have one. 2, I don't want to buy one. So like I said, I'll test it versus my 3070, which is technically a $800 graphic card, but with only 8 gig of VRAM. And I can see people making the argument, oh, you beating like maybe like on same game at 10% the 4060, but you're 2 years later. So Intel had some catch up to do, and I understand some people are waiting for the 5060. But knowing Nvidia, that's the thing. If the price is like 500 and this card is 350, maybe it could be a way better value. We don't know yet because the new budget friendly, and I'm using a lot of quotes saying that, are basically like not released yet from AMD and Nvidia. Here you can see their performance claim. And yeah, there's so many games that it's kind of tough to read. And people always say, at least as a reviewer, you should look at those graphs, but not necessarily consider it for a data point. But I still think it can be useful because if your game is testing, like when you do your own testing, way under the performance that Intel did, then you know that maybe there's some kind of problem, drivers, configuration, and you're gonna look at it. So it's still useful material. Now, a quick side note, I really like the clean and functional interface of the Intel drivers. Now, I understand when Arc got released, the first generation, that there was a lot maybe of bugs with games and things like that, but just the software seems really well thought. Let's do a quick unboxing of the card before testing the performance. I did tell Intel that refurbished card were okay if they perform the same, but they sent a new unit, so I appreciate that. Everything feels minimalistic for the graphic design of the box. I can appreciate that like only the key points are there, and it's not like, you know, with big CG dragon on, like, it's look more classy and professional. It's well packaged to the way that the card lift when you open the box is a nice way to do it. Like I mentioned before, I am impressed by the build quality. It really feels solid, and we'll see later, but the fan in the card is so quiet. I was quite surprised about that, comparing with my 3070 that it can be so loud. It's not that bad now because with the Be Quiet 701 case as a thick glass panel, but like when I game at night and it's super quiet in the house, you can really hear the card still. It's really not the case with the Intel card. I mean, the card was so quiet that I didn't put the side panel when I did all my gaming testing, and you almost didn't hear the card. We have a side view of the card here. Like I mentioned earlier, the build quality of the fan seems good, at least from the top, because like I said, I didn't open the card. You can see here that you only need one 8-pin connector. And after looking at video of the, 1590 with like the 12-volt connectors, that seems to be melting. It's kind of nice to see something reasonable, but of course it's not the same market. And here you can see the back of the card, which the one HDMI 2.1 port and 3 DisplayPort 2.1. And here we can see the size comparison with my 3070. Also impressive, there's almost no dust on it after 4 years, which show you that I'm more a console gamer than a PC gamer, even if I'm getting like very good hardware right now. Here we can have a quick look at the Arc A310, so first generation card from Intel, and it's also like is a 99 USD card. The idea when a friend got it is to put maybe in a small media center. The card only have a small tiny fan, and we'll see later that that it's very loud, and my friend compared it like a old laptop fan, and I think that's accurate. It's a 1080p card, but like I'll still do that test at like 1440p just to compare. We can also see here that it's a very low profile card. So the idea would be like if you just want to have AV1 encoding and decoding, that you could use a small card like that as an add-on. And the card has a TBP of 50 watt. You get one HDMI 2.0 and 2 mini display port at the back of the card. So it's a very compact card. Now, one thing I would like to talk about is like how clean are the drivers. Like the interface is well done, and you have all the option like easily like reachable, and it's easy like to follow what the card is doing for like the temperature and how much VRAM is used. And now you can see here the Arc with the clean look in my case. And yes, I did an honorable like cable management job, but until I put back my AM5 board and make sure that everything worked, I didn't really want to cable manage it. Let's talk about the spec. I'm using my Arc B701 from Be Quiet, so plenty of space, especially using a micro ATX motherboard. I kept the glass panel off because the card was quite silent. For the motherboard, it's a B450M Pro 4 from Asrock with the BIOS 2.2. The memory is 32 gig in an 8x4 configuration, so I had to lower it at 3000 MHz instead of 3200. I'm using my XPG S70 Blade for the SSD, well, the Nvme. The drivers for Intel are 32.0.100, and I'm using 572.16 for the NVIDIA drivers. So I feel it's a realistic scenario when you have a small AM4 machine and you just want to upgrade the GPU and see if you get better performance. Now, when I was talking about the noise level, it's kind of interesting. The tool I'm using only measure by minimum 30. So if there's no noise, it will stay at 30 decibel. And even if I would put the nozzle like close to the super close to the card to almost touch, even when I was doing rendering or like gaming at Cyberpunk with ray tracing at medium, it stayed at 30, which surprised me quite a bit. Geekbench 6 was interesting. The 3070 is leading in open sale by 34%, but if we use Vulkan, there's only like a 1% difference between the card. And depending on the game, it's something I'll see often. Like the 3070 can lead sometimes, but like the 580 is often keep up with it. And you know, knowing the price difference, yeah, the 3070 is like almost a 5-year-old card now, but the 580 is now having the same level of performance for like 2.5 times less for the price, which is not unexpected, but it's still good to see. I also decided to do Geekbench AI. We'll talk about AI a little later, and it's just one direct machine learning test. And it's interesting because it's used different like conversion layer for the Snapdragon X, while for the MacBook it used a neural engine and the GPU for the two like graphic cards. So it's not an apple to apple comparison, but we can see here that like for single precision, both cards are basically neck to neck. Then when we switch to half precision, the Arc is leading, but when we go to quantize, like the Arc has a big margin over the 3070. Of course, those tests are still like in development, so it's just to give us like a number and a measure for it, but we'll see how it performs a little later with AI workload. I wanted to test Cinebench R34 after, but for the GPU, there's no supported drivers. So I look, it used the Red Shift engine, and in the spec, it said that it's only supported right now NVIDIA AMD card. So this is why I could not test it with the Snapdragon X or the Arc B580. Shadow of the Tomb Raider is next. Using a native resolution of 3440 by 1440p with DirectX 11, we get a 69 FPS average at high settings, and at low setting we get 115 average FPS. So I'm sure the game is quite playable that way, even if the Dual RTX 3070 is still leading on this benchmark. Monster Hunter Wild benchmark was next, using a 2580 by 1080p with XCSS. We get like 61 FPS, and we get 47 FPS if we use the native resolution of 3440 by 1440p. The Dual 3070 is still leading there, but like there's many settings you could adjust. You could switch to FSR. They suggested by default to put frame generation, but frame generation only work if you already have a good stable like frame rate. Also didn't really play to adjust the settings of the game. I just wanted to see how it performed with XCSS. Starfield was all over the place. It's mostly like an engine limitation. And I decided to go in Aquila City and just start shooting. When I was using XCSS, I would get around 46 frames by second versus 75 using my RTX 3070. But then if I move to FSR 3, I could go around 60, and that's the video where you see. But the shooting doesn't really feel great on any of the 3 cards. Cyberpunk 2077 was next. You can see here that like with ray tracing at low or medium, I get around 60 frames per second in the big open world, and then around like 56 to 60 inside. That's just the beginning of the game, though I could do a little more testing. What's interesting is that the GPU would be at 65 Celsius, so temperature were quite well controlled and the noise level was super low. That was also with using XCSS balance. So 60 for the B50, 87 for the Dual. And then the Arc 310 is just for testing, but like the 17 frame second is just, you know, it's not the card I would play Cyberpunk with. A $100 card with only 4 gig of VRAM, but I'm sure if you lower the setting quite a bit, you can play. ADs was basically a lock at 600 frames second, which seems to be an engine limitation on both cards, the B580 and the Asus Dual. Destiny 2 is a weird one to test because of anti-cheat on PC. You cannot have like MSI Afterburner and for monitoring the frame rate. So you can put the frame rate in the game. It's the tiny like green counter on the top right, but it's more like an impression of like the lowest frame rate I saw, just moving around. It's around 75 FPS at native resolution with high setting for the B580 and around 115 for the Asus Dual. But I would take this test with a grain of salt. Both card, the game is quite playable, and I'm sure you can adjust the settings to get to your prefer like FPS and resolution. Now Forza Horizon 5 was super interesting because I bought a high refresh rate OLED monitor, and that was the first time while playing Horizon that was like, oh my god, everything is so smooth. And really understanding our high refresh rate can be super useful. So the average I was getting was 139 FPS for the B580 and around maybe 150 for the Arc. That was using XCSS and some kind of high settings. But I could play with like a lot of settings and get it even higher. So it's quite playable and super fun. Like I mentioned previously, the cards stay cool. When you're not doing anything, the temperature would drop to 46 or 44 Celsius. Here, doing my DaVinci Resolve, it's like 52 Celsius. And if I go in gaming like Cyberpunk, then I would get to 65 Celsius. So the fans are doing really a good job to cool off the card. Next was using Handbrake for doing an AV1 encoding of a H.264 video for the R36S review I did. It took 24 minutes, 3 seconds for the Arc. Took 26 minutes 43 seconds for the 3070, and it took 36 minutes 33 seconds for the Arc A310. For both Intel GPU, I was using QuickSync if available, and I used the Nvme encoding for the NVIDIA GPU. I was using the fast AV1 setting in the software, but I'm sure there's way better and more effective way to do that encoding, but that was just a quick test to see what would happen. Now let's talk about AI. One thing Intel pushes the marketing is AI Playground. You can install it on an Arc if you have an Arc card, and then you have access to image generation or prompt using different machine learning model. You can see here generating a prompt to generate 20 image, and because it's a small 3 billion model, you can see that like the VRAM is like 2.5 gig of usage, and the temperature is like only 46 Celsius. And here I was asking it to generate a math proof. Again, a small 3.2 billion model with Llama. Now we also decided to test AI Playground using the Arc 310. Things were quite sluggish. We moved to LM Studio, and using a 3 billion model for Llama 3.2, you could see that it would be slow to generate, but it would generate maybe 1.3 tokens a second and take a couple minutes to do a math proof. While on the Arc B580, we tried different models like 7 billion for Llama, even up to DeepSeek 14. Then it starts slowing down because it has to use some of the RAM instead of the VRAM. I think there was 10 gig in the VRAM. But in general, everything was so quick and snappy using LM Studio. For the math proof, we would get 58.84 token by second, or 42 for different one in Lambda with the 3 billion machine learning model. And depending on the model, on the 3070, we would get 55.73 tokens second for DeepSeek at 7 billion. If we use Llama 3.2 at 3 billion, we would get 81.78 token. And for Lava, 67 token a second. So it really depends, but like I said, I was not training model. I was just trying to use different model and see the speed. And it's quite speedy, and they say 200 maximum tops for the full GPU. So if you use a lot of model and just want to ask question, I think it's a super efficient GPU to do. But of course, it was just an introduction to machine learning, and I need to play more with it. On the negative, I didn't have like huge bug, but there was two tiny things. The first one seems to be with the fan curve. I'm sure it can be adjusted, but like if I would run let's say a CPU benchmark with my 3070, it would basically turn the fan off and stay off, while with the Arc, with the version that was the last public drivers, I didn't see anything like better drivers. The fan would like start for 5 seconds, stop for 5 seconds, start for 5 seconds, and continuing doing that for a while instead of just turning off. So I think it's maybe just the fan curve that would need to be adjusted. The other thing is that with some game like Cyberpunk 2077 or like Starfield, if they would, you have often a bunch of different launcher, and when they would pop up, they would like you would crash with a black screen, hear the sound for 5 seconds, and then cut off. Either sound for 5 seconds and then cut off again. A quick hard reboot would fix it, and eventually, because sometimes different launcher launch different one, so you end up with 2 or 3 like different like piece of software to click just to get to the game. So eventually, like for Cyberpunk, I identify like which one seems to go directly and avoid the problem. I didn't have that time to reset
hardware drivers with the Windows shortcut, so maybe that would have fixed the issue. But like I said, it would be easy to avoid. Like I think Cyberpunk, but not Cyberpunk, but I think like Starfield crashed the when it like compiled the shader had the same issue. But in general, it was a pretty stable experience. It was also great to have like the card like when you're not doing anything on your computer being maybe at 46 Celsius, and when you running benchmark, like the card would get to like 65, 66 Celsius. So it seemed the fan's doing a great job while being mostly like silence or a whisper level, which was the thing that impressed me the most after the performance of the card. Now, on the negative for say, like I think the biggest one are like the availability and the pricing. The pricing is fine at 350. Of course, we will always love cheaper card, but with inflation and things like that, it's not necessarily surprising. But the card sold out so fast that like it's rare. From time to time, you would find stock from Best Buy, but then they would sell it quick. So I don't know if like the demand and the availability end up surprising Intel, but like, and also the other thing is that I saw like if you look at the slide like here, there's other AEB model, but like in Canada I didn't see any on the shelf, so I don't know if like it's really just a demand. And the last thing is that it's the uncertainty. I mean, like Intel changing management, and there was rumor. No, I don't comment on rumor, but there was rumor that like maybe they would get out of the discrete video card market. I hope it's not the case because we really need more competition. I mean, the card was like stable, it's performing well. I did a lot of benchmark using XCSS. I didn't try XCSS2 because I didn't have the game for it. But the thing is that it's like it's performing and it's finally like working well in a drop-in setting where I just switch the card and use my 5600X processor, which is like a 4-year-old processor. So I could even get better performance if I use my 7800X3D. Though, so in the end, I think that's like it's really a good card. I show it to people and they bought one already when they found stock. So I really think that Intel is a winner there. Like now, the argument is that it's a yeah, it's beat in their marketing they're beating or close to 4060, but 2 years later. But I think the main argument and problem is basically that like yeah, the 5060, which we know nothing about, would probably like get better performance of this card. But if the price from Nvidia continue to go up and up, that could like mean be a 500 or $450 card, right? So I think having more affordable option that doesn't suck and perform well is what the market needs. Like, yeah, there's a race for the high end and machine learning and things like that. And there's even rumor for Arc with a lot of memory for like using that card for AI. But for now, I think the market needed that, and that was a product I was excited to try. And in general, when I'm sad to give the product back, I know the products did something good, and that was the case for the Arc. But like, yeah, the card is aimed at 20, I mean, at 1440p in the marketing, and I went using it in a higher resolution because I use 3440 by 1440p, so an ultra wide resolution. And with Cyberpunk with XCXS, I was basically at 60 to 80 frames second. The 12 gig of RAM is super useful. We run some local model with DL Studio for AI, and it performs super well. Also use like AV1 encoding just to see, and the card is super fast. I do feel that it throw punch depending of the game with the 3070, which is a high-end card, because all the marketing is around the 4060. But honestly, like the card is so silent, even when running Cyberpunk. it stay at 30 decibel, which is the minimum the tool I have can measure. Even if I put it in the case, that I would actually prefer having that card versus the 3070. Now, I really hope that Intel will stay in the discrete card business because we need competition and not having just Team Red and Team Green. But like, if you're able to get that card for 350, I think you're gonna be quite happy with the performance you're getting, plus the AI around 200 tops, goodies, and encoding, decoding for AV1 and other tool. So it's really a great card to get. Thanks for watching.